Hi there again, Izzy from DigitalGoja.com showrooms. Today we're going to take a look at how to troubleshoot triggers. Say that fast 10 times. Troubleshoot triggers, troubleshoot triggers. Yes, I've seen some questions posted on forums and on a lot of the blogs on both Amazon and eBay and DigitalGoja.com about customers that are confused about how to set up a trigger. Well, we're going to go some troubleshooting tips on how to do this so that you can get the Altura Photo, for example. This is the Altura Photo wireless trigger set for Canon. Now, it comes in for Canon and for Nikon. Most of these tips are definitely meant for both, because actually the main difference between purchasing these is when you're going to use it for remote control of your camera, you want to make sure you get the one that says for either Canon or Nikon, because the connection is very proprietary. So let's take a close look and see what the troubleshooting tips are for Altura Photo's wireless trigger set. I'm going to use the one for 2 flashes right now. Again, if this video helps you out, always remember to hit me up with a like button underneath and subscribe to our channel for future tutorials and sessions such as this. As always, any questions or comments, place them below. And don't forget, whenever in Miami, come visit me at DigitalGoja.com showrooms. All right, first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we have our batteries in here correctly. So you're going to notice you're going to receive 4 of these AAA batteries. These are the ones that are going to go into your receiver. Now notice that you have the nomenclature right on the inside of the receiver showing where your positive and your negative polarity go. You want to make sure you put them in there correctly. If not, you're not going to get it to work and you run the risk of actually damaging and shorting it out. Plus, notice these tiny little toggle switches in here. You want to have these all facing the same way, whether you have them all facing up or facing down. This is the initial way that you should work this until later on you start noticing that you might have any kind of radio interference. Remember, these guys are 433 megahertz. So we do the same for both. This happens to be a 2 receiver or 2 flash kit. So you're going to have 2 of these receivers and you're going to put in the batteries again, following the polarity designations in the nomenclature, and also make sure that you have these toggle switches all facing the same way. So once we have that out of the way, then we move on to this little guy. This guy is our transmitter. This is the one that's going to go onto the camera, and notice that this is the guy that has the contacts. These guys down here have no contacts whatsoever. They do have the added capability of putting it onto a tripod or a light stand. So there's your 1/4-inch thread. But this is the guy that actually is getting the signal from your camera. So he's going to be on your hot shoe. Now this guy works with a really funky little battery. You receive this also. It's a 12-volt battery. This is very popular in a lot of remote controls for garage door openers. It's a 12 volt, so this guy will last you a good long time. And again, this guy also has the little toggle switches. Make sure they are lined up in the same direction. Close it up. Now we're going to do a setup for controlling the flashes with your camera. All right, so now we're going to do away with the flashes and we're going to use 1 receiver and the transmitter to control our Canon Rebel camera. Now this is where it's very important to make sure that you get the Altura wireless trigger set for your particular camera. This is where you have to get the one for Canon, for your Canon camera, and the one that says Nikon for your Nikon camera. And the main reason, or actually the only reason, is the connectors. This is the connector system that you use for the Canon Rebel camera. If you get the one for Nikon, it has a funky little connector on one side, which is the one that is used for the Nikon GPS board. That will not function with your Canon Rebel camera. So let's take a closer look and make sure that we are using this properly and troubleshoot any issues. Now, what I've noticed that the main confusion happens is with all these cables that you get in there. You're going to get a bunch of cables and adapters. These guys will not work with this camera. This is meant for cables that are connected to professional strobe units, like some of the strobe units that we use in studios. Some of them even have this 1/4-inch jack, which that's why they give you this special adapter so that you can use this. But this is not going to function at all with regular speed lights or with this Rebel camera. Let's put these guys aside. Look for this guy, and they made it simple to stand out because it has this funky little coil system. This allows it to extend further depending on how high you want to place this guy. I've had a lot of customers that will put a TTL strobe onto the camera and they'll put this on a flash bracket or something else, because remember, this is not making any kind of connection with your camera. This is meant to just stay in place. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to connect this guy on the side here. And the reason I'm putting, it's the same port. The reason I want to keep this guy on the camera is because notice how it has that angular connection. This is meant to work on the side of the camera much easier. So we're going to plug this guy in here. All right, and then let's bring over our trusty Rebel. And notice on the side, you have this plug connector here, this cover. Open this up, and you're going to see the icon. Notice the icon there that shows a remote control. This is where now this guy that has that right angle system, boom, that plugs in there. And now I'm going to put the receiver onto the shoe. All right, put it tight enough so that this doesn't come flying off, but not super tight. And now I can set my Rebel camera up, turn it on, and now this is the guy that you're going to have on you at all times. This is your transmitter. And notice you have a little button on the top there. This is the one that fires off the camera. So you have this guy set to camera, very important. You have to now set this to camera mode, not to flash. So when you set it to camera, it is now expecting a signal from here to control your camera. So fire it off, and it now fires every single time. Perfect. This is a great way to take nature shots or even baby shots, any kind of photography where the photographer doesn't want to be right up on the camera. You can place it anywhere. Now, this is, if you're a beginner, guess what? You can still get away with having it on full auto. So you can set your camera on full auto, and this is going to work perfectly because it'll still do the focusing, it'll still do the correct exposure for you. And again, this fires every single time because it's creating a radio frequency. Here's a troubleshooting tip. I've seen that a lot of photographers want to use a shortcut here. They're like, okay, wait, I got the camera set up for firing and remote, but I want to use a flash too. So let me just put my flash on the shoe and I'm set to go. Well, guess what? That doesn't work because the camera is now only receiving a signal to this unit so that it fires it off. But it is not working with synchronization on the hot shoe. So now when you go to fire this off, you're shooting the camera, but notice how at one point the flash actually fired before the camera. So it's not synchronizing. So you're going to be basically guessing that you're going to get the correct exposure. If you want to have your flash fire off and you want to control your camera, you have to change this setup. You cannot put the flash on your receiver. You have to remove the receiver from here. All right. You have to put your flash onto the hot shoe itself so it's getting a correct connection. And you can set it again to manual, TTL, however you choose to. So I'm going to set it to TTL now because I have the camera set to automatic, intelligent auto. And I'm going to fire the camera off. And now I'm going to get the correct exposure because now it is actually getting the readout from the camera. So on TTL, it's getting the correct exposure. It even had itself set to the correct zooming, which is at 24. Let me see, I'm gonna zoom again. Now I'm at 35 and it switched over to 5.6. Notice how as I change this, it does do the zooming automatically for me. So every time that I press it, it does get the correct exposure. So if you want to do this kind of photography where you want to control your camera from a distance, you're going to have to place this guy on something else. You're going to have to put it on a bracket, or you know, if it's going to hang on the side, you got to be careful. You don't want to provide too much pressure so that this guy pops off. But you cannot put the flash on top. But if you do it this way, it's going to fire every single time. And again, I'm controlling my camera and my flash is working because it's getting the TTL signal right from the hot shoe. So if you set it up this way, you can do both. You can fire off your camera from your transmitter remotely, and you can use your strobe flash. Why is one flash firing and the other one isn't when I'm trying to control two flashes at the same time? Well, one of the troubleshooting tips that I've noticed, sometimes you inadvertently have one of these guys set to camera. So if this guy is now set to camera and this one is set to flash, guess what? This guy fires off, but this guy's not synchronized, so he's not going to give you the exposure properly. So notice how this guy's firing off, this guy is not. So if I switch it back to flash, and now I fire, notice how this guy is firing off every single time now. Here, I'll have it. See, it's now firing off. So if you're having that issue where all of a sudden one of your flashes isn't going off, go look at your receiver and make sure that it is set to flash mode. All of a sudden, one of my flashes seems to be firing after I depress the shutter. What is going on? Well, you have to keep an eye on your shutter speed. Notice how I have it set to 1/125. Sometimes, if we're not paying attention and we're depressing the shutter and we go ahead and pick too slow of a shutter speed, like 1/20th or 1/15th of a second, now the shutter is staying open longer, so this guy is not synchronized properly. And if you go the other way to a much faster shutter speed, like 1/500th of a second, again, they're not synced properly, so your shutter is opening and closing much quicker than your strobes are synchronized to. Remember, these guys do not transmit any information when it comes to TTL or second curtain or high-speed sync. So you have to have it at the proper speed. You can work anywhere between 1/60th of a second and 1/200th of a second. Anything past that, these guys are not going to synchronize properly, and you're going to have your flashes either activating before your shutter is fully depressed or after. Now we're going to set this up to work two flashes with a very popular camera. This is the Canon Rebel T6i. This again will work with any Canon camera that is out there, because when we are working with these guys, everything has to be set to manual. Yes, you heard it right. These triggers create a radio frequency, but they don't transmit any TTL information. So when you go to use your strobe, your flashes can basically be any flash out on the market. Now this one happens to be the Altura ETTL flash for Canon, and here I have an Altura Photo. This is their new high power 958X flash for Canon also. Again, you can use any strobe on here. It could be original Canon strobes, it could be other manufacturer strobes, it could be fully manual strobes. But the reason I'm using these, they tend to sell these in kits, and most of the kits are set up with the more popular ETTL flashes. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our Rebel and we're going to go to our command dial, and we're going to set it to the letter M for manual. Yes, I did mean manual. You have to set your exposure. I mean, we're doing wireless flash. Wireless flash, if you're going to work with radio frequency triggers such as these guys right here, you have to have it set to manual to get the best exposure control possible. Now, next thing we're going to do is, remember, this is our transmitter. This is the one that has the contacts for the hot shoe. So this guy is going to be placed on top as if it was a strobe. And lock it. Notice that it has that little knurled knob there. Turn it, not super tight, but tight enough so that this guy doesn't come flying off. Now it's ready to go. Now, we're going to get one of our strobes. I'm going to get this guy first. Going to remove it off of the supplied stand, and I'm going to place one of the transmitters onto the stand now as if this was a flash. Again, it slides right on, and you're going to turn the knob here so that we have it on there. Again, not super tight, but tight enough so it doesn't come flying off. And now I'm going to place the Altura flash onto this as if this was the camera, and again go to the same procedure, lock it in place, again tight enough so that this doesn't go flying off. Alright, so this guy's set. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this other flash. This one is a 958X, and slide it on, turn it, that locks it in place. Again, tight enough so that doesn't fly off, but not too tight. And now we're going to place the flash on here as if this was the camera. Straight on. And this guy has a very unique locking system. They made it simple. Just flip it over and that locks it in place. So now these two guys are ready to be controlled. Sort of. You now have to activate your strobe. So, start off with this guy. You're going to turn it on. And the default is always TTL. Now this is great if you're using it on the camera, but since we're putting it on a radio frequency trigger that doesn't transfer TTL information, if you leave it on this mode, this sucker is going to shoot at full power every single time. So if, for example, you're working at a great distance and this is your main light source, go ahead, go for it. But here's the thing, I prefer setting it to manual. Hit the mode button till you get to the M, and then you set the power ratio. So I can switch it all the way down to 1/128th power, or I can make it to full power. This allows you to do most of your control. So I set it to 1/16th power because I'm going to be using two strobes. So that guy is ready to go. And very important, notice how you have three settings right here. Notice the three settings. You want to set it to flash. Boom, it fires off. This is saying that it is now synchronized and firing and getting a signal to your strobe. Second flash. All right, same thing. This guy, you hold it for a little bit. That activates it. Now this guy I was already using on manual, so notice how I have this one set 1:1. So this one's going to be at a further distance from my subject matter. It's ready to go. And again, we go to the three switches that are here, and we want to switch it to flash. All right, so now this guy's ready for flash. Now both of these guys are ready to be controlled by this guy. So now, rule of thumb, and I always start out with that, especially if you're not working with a flash meter, is first of all, I've noticed that Canon tends to work really well at 1/125th of a second for flash sync. So I'm going to set it to 1/125th, and you'll notice that that's a designation right on the back. Notice how I changed it with my command dial, and I set it to 1/125th of a second. That's the flash sync speed that I've noticed works really well with Canon cameras. And then you set your aperture according to the distance that you're working from. All right, so for example, now everything is set to go. So when I fire here, boom, your flashes are going to fire off. And again, you're going to have to look at your exposure on your camera and see whether you have the correct exposure or not. If it's too bright, then again, close down on your f-stop, and remember, on Rebel cameras you have to hold the AV button and then switch with the command dial. So if it's too bright, you have to pick a larger number. It's closing down on your aperture. That's the way to do it directly from the camera. Now, if you want to change the power on the flashes, remember, this does not transmit any information from the camera to the flash, so you physically have to go over to the flash and then you change the power ratio. So I can go ahead here and switch it from 1:1 ratio and cut it down to maybe 1/8 because it's giving off too much light, and then try it again, fire off. That way you have a basis so that you can start setting up your strobes correctly and do some incredible wireless flash photography. Happy shooting!